So, Oran Pendek, what do you think it is with cryptozoologists in Australia? Because we've had heaps of them the weekend, haven't we? We have had many Antipodean type people at the Weird Weekend, yes. And my theory on this is as follows, which is my theory, mine, and I thought of it, which is my theory. The reason why there is so many cryptozoologists in Australia is that Australia is like, as they say up north, that hard. It's a really like a hard country. You see what we get here? Maybe a rabbit, oh, scary, like, or a badger. In Australia, you have the 30-foot crocodiles, you have great white sharks, and you have poisonous snakes and spiders and stuff like that. And in Britain, it's a bit of a pussy, isn't it? Wildlife in Britain is a bit of a pussy, but in Australia, wildlife, it means business. It has a big T. And all the cryptids, yes, that's a cryptid, isn't it? Yeah. There's the 30-foot lizards, and there are sea serpents, and marsupial wolves, and marsupial cats, and marsupial manatees. You just made that up, didn't you? Yes, I made that one up. But you get the picture. So they've come an awful long way, and you've just told me about all these fantastic cryptids in Australia. So what have they come here to talk about? Oh, they come here to talk about the time they found a toad in their backyard and they elevated it. They are talking about toad elevation. Thank you very much. Mike Ruby, all the way from Australia, to talk about picking up a toad.
Just needed it a bit darker, you know, atmospheric, scary cats. Now I need you to remember that sound because that is the sound of a North American cougar, and you'll be hearing more of that. But we just need to do a little bit of a family-friendly warning because some of the images in tonight's presentation are fairly gory. So if you're of a sensitive disposition, you're a vegetarian, if you're a small child, if mum and dad can just bear in mind, most of the images are fine, but there is some footage towards the end of the presentation which is a bit frightening, so just bear that in mind. Some of you might be familiar with my name and Mike's name in relation to the big cat stuff that's been happening in Australia. I should probably come clean, come out of the closet. My pen name is Ruby Lane, and Ruby's actually my middle name. Recently, with the publication of the book, I'm using my first name, so I'm coming out of the closet a bit. So prior to this, I was using Ruby Lane as a pen name to sort of keep my work and my personal life a bit separate, but that's just all gone to hell, so I'm public now.
My name is Knight, I think. I'm just living in the West Coast of Alberta again, and handy on that. Jesus! Did you hear that? It's here. Anyway, yeah, they got here about 6 o'clock. So, just thought I'd let you know in case you've got activity. Okay. Bye.
That was Kanina Howard. Kanina lives in an area called Kenthurst, which is just on the edge of Sydney. In Kenthurst, there have been many big cat sightings. Kenthurst is part of the Greater Hawkesbury area, which sits on the edge of Sydney, which is one of Australia's biggest cities. It's completely surrounded by bush, and there have been almost 500 independent big cat sightings in that area. And it just so happened that Kanina and several of her neighbours who have also had big cat sightings have formed a bit of a telephone tree, if you will, and they often call each other if one of them has had a bit of big cat action. Kanina was in the process of letting one of her neighbours know that she had seen a big cat nearby when the big cat made an appearance on the telephone message. It was actually just outside her kitchen at the time, and that was the sound that you heard. I might just play it one more time just so you can hear that audio, but it was very like the cougar that we heard earlier.
Monday night, I think. Just letting you know that we've got action on eleventh again, and hanging on that.
Yeah, so that sounded very cougar-like. We thought that was pretty impressive. Now, of course, Mike and I have spent the past 5 years writing our book, Australian Big Cats, An Unnatural History of Panthers. An unnatural history because obviously big cats are not indigenous to Australia. The last time we had a cat-like animal in our country was actually a marsupial lion. It was extinct 30 to 40,000 years ago, so we don't actually have big cats as such. Even the small cats that we've got were introduced around the time of the first fleet. So big cats are a very real flesh and blood mystery in Australia. We describe it as possibly Australia's biggest wildlife mystery, perhaps aside from the Tasmanian tiger. This is half a wallaby. Bowen Mountain is actually part of the Hawkesbury area. And what's great about this carcass, and you'll see a few of them, are you'll see there that there's 4 slash marks in the flesh.
Look how close to suburbia, Beck.
It was very close to suburbia. This was actually at the end of a suburban street that backed into bushland.
But in actual fact, that's been dragged.
And that's Mike poking it with a stick very scientifically to judge the depth of the cuts in the flesh. And this is actually an unlucky kangaroo that we were shown just a couple of weeks ago, just before we came out. There was a group of fishermen on their way home from a fishing trip, funnily enough, and they were driving past a national park. A large black cat dashed across the road. They skidded to a stop. They walked back to roughly where they saw the cat, and they actually found this, at the time, freshly dead kangaroo carcass, missing its head, which is fairly common in a lot of these cases. And you can see that the exposed ribs. It was doing a very neat job of gradually eating its way down the carcass before it was interrupted. It hadn't actually come back to that carcass. A lot of secondary predators have come in, like foxes and probably quolls as well. Other little carnivorous animals have come in and had a feed. So just to give you an idea, this little mud map, you can see Sydney. It's actually a map of New South Wales. You can just see the concentration of reports around Sydney. And I don't know that you could exactly say that there is necessarily a larger population of mystery cats or anomalous felids hanging around Sydney. It's probably just that there's a greater concentration of people living in that area who happen to engage in outdoor pursuits. There's a lot of people, go bushwalking and horse riding in that area. This is a really big poo that someone found in the bush.
What crap that out?
I've left a lot of the audio in because I think it's quite funny. It sort of humanises it all, but the size of the scats that are being found are just incredible. absolutely incredible, really impressive, you know, filled with bits of bone and hair. So, you know, obviously whatever's leaving them behind, you know, they're large carnivores. And people like us like finding things like that, putting them in plastic bags and keeping them in the fridge so we can show other people.
That sad looking little foot sticking out the side there.
Some of you might know Tony Healy, that's actually his voice.
I just cannot believe this one, isn't it?
That's a rather large suspected fur ball, not an owl pellet.
That's just outrageous. Sorry, just... This is so wrong.
It is pretty wrong. A large part of this presentation is actually made up of photographic stills and video that we have collected over the past 8 years. And some of you will have seen some of this footage, but a lot of it is fairly new. So we hope you can start to see some patterns here. This is a fantastic still. It was taken in the 1920s. That poor little puma, this photograph was actually taken in Australia. It does look a bit Wild West, but it was taken down in Victoria, and that little puma was an escapee from a circus, the Lennox Brothers Circus, and it was reasonably tame, but once the men of the town heard that there was a wildcat on the loose, they all jumped in the car in their best outfits with guns and their fox terriers, and they hunted this cat down. And it was actually the journalist who ratted the cat out. All the hunters were looking one way, and the journalist said, "No, guys, look, it's over there." And they shot it. They set the terrier on it, then they shot it, and then they had to shoot it again. So, and it was only a scrappy little thing. For a puma, it was kind of small. But they took this tremendous photograph, which came to light probably about 8 to 10 years ago. Yeah, about 8 to 10 years ago. But it's such a fantastic photograph. We were almost going to use this as the cover of the book. It's great. Mary McCarthy was sitting in her car waiting for some construction work on the road to be finished. She happened to see out of the corner of her eye something large and black going across the field. She happened to have a camera handy, which is kind of rare. So she picked it up and she shot several frames of this fantastic black cat. This photo could have almost been taken in England. Australia normally isn't this green. But she snapped this fantastic picture of this cat, which, as you can see, looks like a reasonably big cat. This is actually still from video footage taken by a fellow called Steve Temby. And as you can see, there is a cat on the left and a wallaby on the right. They both look kind of blobby. The quality of the footage wasn't terribly good, so we haven't actually included the video for this presentation. Doreen Williams was also sitting in a car, stopped in traffic on a country road when she saw this large black cat slink under a pine tree. Now we've kind of zoomed in to give you a better look at the actual cat. But the pine tree itself is a couple of 100 years old, so it's a huge tree. So it's actually all in perspective. Wyangla Dam in New South Wales was the scene of this interesting piece of big cat footage that was actually taken by a farmer who was going around his property, just happened to have a camera handy, and he was looking at what he thought was a really strangely moving calf. But it wasn't until he started filming that he realised it was actually a really large cat. You can't quite see it in this footage, because of the way the sun is, and the animal looks much darker, but it was actually sort of a golden colour. Now the Lithgow panther, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this case. It's probably Australia's most famous contemporary recent big cat case. We've actually got the raw footage here. I don't know if we're going to play the whole 12 minutes because it's kind of tedious, but the short version is that Gail and Wayne Pound were getting ready for work one morning. Gail happened to see a large cat out the back window. Wayne was having a shower. Gail yelled for Wayne to get out of the shower and grab the camera, so Wayne filmed this naked in the lounge room for about 15 minutes. And what you're seeing initially here is the domestic cat. There are actually two cats that were pictured in this footage. This is the domestic cat, well, the cat that is quite obviously domestic, and there is another larger black cat later on in this footage. It seems highly likely that the black cat was actually a large domestic cat for a couple of reasons. It would be pretty unusual for a large exotic cat to be keeping company with a small domestic cat. And also, given the fact that both of the cats quite obviously have pointed ears as well. I'll just see if I can get a bit forward here. And like all good 14 footage, it's a bit blurry and shaky to start off with. But this footage actually caused a sensation in Australia, and where it was filmed, Lithgow is an old mining town that had fallen on hard times, and oh, here we've got the black cat coming into focus now. It had fallen onto hard times. Not a lot happens in Lithgow. It's a real struggle town. It's a remote village. And the spotlight that this town was put under for a period of a couple of months was truly incredible. And it got so bad for the people who filmed the footage, they ended up having to move because a lot of their neighbours thought they were hoax fakers. They weren't. They just filmed two very odd-looking cats from the backyard. Can you just see the... I'll just fast forward to some of the... That's the obviously domestic cat. It's a presentation without computer problems. Bloody cat, where's the... It's going to come lurking out of the bushes in a minute. I mean, at first glance, the black cat that's in this footage is very panther-like. You know, it does look like a melanistic leopard, but on closer inspection, once you've watched this video a few times, it is actually a large Felis catus. And we have actually been in correspondence with a fellow who shot a large black cat out in Lithgow, here it is here, that he claims was this particular cat, and he's actually getting it stuffed at the moment at a local taxidermist. So it'll be really interesting to see this cat when it's finally mounted. So you can see here it looks sort of fairly muscular. Oops, large cat. But it was interesting in the wake of this footage, the number of people who went to Lithgow looking for this cat. I think we had Rex Gilroy, Tim the Yowie Man turned up, several tabloids. It just went crazy. Skip ahead. But there, that's probably a really good angle for the cat. You can see its pointy ears. It is actually just a normal cat, but It was much larger than the other grey and white one. This is some really interesting footage. There was a gentleman down in Victoria who, in the wake of the Kurt Engel cat that was shot in 2005, came forward with the story of a puma that was reputedly shot by his father on their family farm in Victoria, and it was later mounted by a taxidermist. He has a clear childhood recollection of his father bringing this puma into the kitchen, throwing the body on the kitchen table before they took it to the taxidermist. It's been sitting in his pool room, for want of a better word, for the past 40 years. And he came forward with the carcass, and we had a look. I mean, unfortunately, it's one of these great stories. You can't really prove the origins of exactly where it came from, but it seems quite incredible. And he was fairly adamant that this cat had been in his family for, a good generation, and he could recall not seeing it shot, but seeing the body. You can see there, I mean, it is obviously a real puma, but as to where it came from, it's another mystery. This is some great footage. This is a still from. This picture was actually on the front of the Northern Territory News recently, which is a paper that's fairly renowned for having bikini women and giant crocodiles and UFOs and yowies on the front page. It's a great little tabloid paper published up on the top end, and they loved this story because it was predictably out there enough for them. But Jan Donovan used to live in the Northern Territory, and she actually filmed this cat near a riverbed in 2004, and she wasn't seeking any money or anything like that. She actually came forward, I think from memory, she got in touch with us through some articles that we ran in a shooter's magazine, and we were really impressed with the musculature of this cat and the fact that it looks very lion-like, and you'll just see it's only a short snippet of film, but it's quite impressive. And like all of these things, sometimes it looks like a little cat and sometimes it looks like a big cat. Sometimes it seems to move like a domestic cat, and other times it seems to move like a lion or a human. A lot of people think that, a lot of skeptics say, how could a cat possibly survive in the Australian outback? There's no food, there's not enough water, what on earth would it survive on? But the reality is that cats can survive for a long time without water as long as they're finding food to eat, because they can get the sustenance that they need from the blood of whatever it is that they kill. And while at first glance Australia might seem a very formidable and inhospitable landscape in which to survive, it's actually quite rich and plentiful in all kinds of food sources, and there are a wealth of small marsupials and rabbits. The rabbits have gone crazy in Australia. We've got loads and loads of rabbits. There's more than enough food for a cat of any size to happily live on. And one of the experts that we've dealt with over the years, Dr. Johannes Bauer, who shot to fame in early 2001 when a report that he wrote, which pretty much confirmed in his mind that there were leopards living, or large exotic cats living in the bush on the edge of Sydney, came to light. And the conversation that we had with him, he said, look, 100 leopards could quite easily live in this particular area, in the Hawkesbury area. and you would never know, you would never see them. And his background was in conducting big cat surveys in places like Nepal, and a lot of the cats that he tracked, he never actually saw. So he said it was quite conceivable. And another fellow that I spoke to about a year ago, his name escapes me, but he calls himself the Lion Whisperer, and he hails from South Africa. And he lives in an area that is renowned for having leopards, and he breeds and works with big cats. And the only leopard he's seen in the wild was probably about 6 months ago. It had been run over on a road that he travels along. But up until that point, he'd actually become quite sceptical of stories about leopards living and breeding in the area. A neighbour of ours in the Blue Mountains who's a keen fisherman, and I should say many of our witnesses are either keen fishermen or hunters, people who spend a lot of time in the bush. Gary's a keen fisherman, he owns his own boat, and he goes fishing quite regularly at a place called Lake Windermere, which is just west of the Blue Mountains. And as it turned out, his boat was the ideal big cat viewing platform. So while he and his wife were kicking back fishing, they happened to notice a black shape moving down the hill, and the cat was oblivious to their presence because they were moored in the middle of the lake. So Gary picked up his camera and started filming, and he captured this great footage of 2 black cats moving around, 2 black cats of unusual size. And it started off that these cats were moving around on logs, and they gradually come down closer to the edge of the water, and you can actually get a better idea of their size. And this is the second cat. This is actually the kitten, or the smaller cat, still reasonably large. Gary, being a sort of lovely, typical Australian bloke, made his wife go back and stand in for the big cat on the log, so she actually had to lie there for 10 minutes so that he could do a size comparison just to gauge exactly how big the cat was. So you can see the cats are a fair old size up around Mudgee Way. Another piece of footage that involves big cats and kangaroos, this was a kangaroo, wasn't it, in Wallaby, is the Andrew Burston footage. Andrew Burston was an electrician, lived down in Victoria, took his kids out for holiday. They went on a bit of a camping holiday, and they were camping near some other people, and everyone started marking on the cat of unusual size that seemed to be stalking a kangaroo. And this is the footage. It's slowed down. We didn't slow it down. This was the actual news footage. And it's an average size kangaroo that, I don't know, it doesn't exactly seem spooked, but obviously didn't think it wanted to hang around. This is some great footage. Oops, actually. Oops. Oh, God. Technological here. Okay. The next bit of footage that I'm going to show you, I'll just replay this again. The next bit of footage I'm going to show you is some unusual footage that we were handed a couple of years ago of a supposed white tiger taken at a place called Radium Hill. And Radium Hill is an old uranium mine. And the fellow who took the footage has actually also seen white or albino kangaroos and white emus. Anyway, this is your classic blob cat because there's really not too much definition, but if you keep your eye on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a kangaroo hopping away. You can see it there.
What is it?
Looks like a lion, like you say. Looks like a bloody one. China.
It's huge, isn't it?
make out that audio, but obviously the woman was saying, you know, it looks like a lion, a tiger. The fellow saying it's huge, it's enormous. Where a giant white cat has come from is a bit of a mystery, but yeah, this Radium Hill location sounds quite interesting. Lots of white animals running around the place. One of the most common theories that people kick around for the source of these mystery cat sightings that occur in Australia and also New Zealand and other places, they lay the blame squarely at the foot of US soldiers who were based in Australia in World War II. Now, it was the fact that some American units did actually have big cat mascots. We know that because we've got photographic proof of it. But not in Australia. We've got photographic proof of large cat mascots in France and also in Southeast Asia, but we actually don't have any footage of big cat mascots from Australia, which would seemingly be the clincher. And the sheer number of stories that have come to us from various people who swear black and blue that they saw American soldiers walking large cats on chains, or saw them bringing them off boats, or letting them go in the bush. It's just bizarre. And from all over the country, you'd think that there was requisite Black Panther mascot in almost every town in Australia. It's just ridiculous. And New Zealand as well. And I've also been told it has been trotted out as an origin story for the UK on occasion. And I just find it inconceivable. I don't know. Well, I guess I know how the rumours started, obviously, is people have got wind of these amazing, you know, photos that we see here. This whiskey was a lion mascot for a unit of pilots stationed in France. It was a special unit that was set up by some wealthy Americans in conjunction with the French, and having quite a lot of money, these guys set themselves up in a hotel rather than in a proper base situation, and they purchased these rather exotic mascots. And here you can see just a couple of the swatches of the unit mascots, and these are actually the emblems from the units that were stationed in Australia, which have helped to feed the origin story that, you know, surely this is proof that the Americans brought large cats to Australia. The only problem with that story, of course, is that there are hundreds of sightings that actually predate the 1940s, so it's obviously not really a good fit. And here's a great photo of that fellow on the left. He was not a wartime. He was a wartime photographer, and he had this photo taken of himself with the unit mascot in Southeast Asia, which is obviously a young lion. Another interesting story that we discuss at length in the book. In fact, we devote a whole chapter to Thylacoleo carnifex and the history of that particular animal, and several stories about big cats that have been seen in Australia that exhibit very unusual attributes. The most common description is the possum-headed cat that people have seen. Possibly one of the best stories that we've got in the book involves a farmer who wished to remain anonymous, and he actually relates a story of how he was driving around one day checking his livestock, and he entered into a paddock and found the carcass of a calf that had been completely predated. The calf had been alive 5 or 6 hours before, and the mother cow had a broken leg and it was all twisted up, and this large black cat was sitting there in the field, sort of glowering at this guy, and he said it was the weirdest thing he had ever seen, and he was adamant it was not any kind of exotic cat. He said it was an animal he had never seen before. It had a weird possum-like head, and it really took its time leaving the field. And he worked out that it had chased the mother cow around, and it had ended up breaking its legs, so he had to end up putting the cow down. But he did keep an eye on that paddock to see if this particular creature, whatever it was, came back, and it never did. But it was incredible. There's a great photograph of this calf, and it's picked clean. It's like something out of an anatomical display. It's just this perfectly articulated skeleton with a head still attached to it. Now, of course, Thylacoleo carnifex has actually been dead, extinct for about 30 to 40,000 years. So it would seem inconceivable that it would be the source of many of these big cat sightings. However, I've got some interesting footage here. I'll play it again because it's very, very short. At first glance, you might even think it's possibly thylacine with its rigid tail. But we've had people remark on the fact that it's got a really big boxy head, this thing, so I don't know that you could necessarily label it thylacine, but it's very interesting. Just pay attention to the tail of the tail. It's just so brief, but the tail is just like a stick sticking out. Probably one of the most famous images to come out of Australia is the Ozen-Cadman tiger. It was photographed by a lady called Rilla Martin, and Rilla saw this unusual creature. She pulled out her little, I think it was a box brownie or something, pulled out her camera, and she took a photograph of this creature. And from that point on, it just caused a storm of controversy. People accused her of hoaxing it, of making it up, and it is the weirdest creature you've ever seen. And I've looked at this photo for the past 5 or 6 years, and I still don't know what it is. But anyway, you can judge for yourselves. This is the image, the Ozen-Cadman tiger, and as you can see, it's got quite distinct stripes at the front, and the stripes kind of get a bit lighter and taper off down the tail. You know, is this a Thylacoleo carnifex? We just kind of threw it in here to open up the debate a bit, but is it Thylacoleo carnifex? Is it some sort of mutation of a thylacine? Is it some sort of chop job, primitive chop job? We don't know, but we've managed to dig up from the archives some fantastic footage of Rilla Martin talking about her sighting, and we've got it here for you guys today.
For over 100 years, from the more remote areas of eastern Australia, have come reports of an unidentified striped animal. While the descriptions of this period are remarkable for their similarities, no skin, spore, bones, nor whole specimen has ever reached a museum for classification.
Martin, how did you come to see this animal?
Well, I was travelling on the road west of Brook, and it was midday and brilliant sunshine, and I happened to be on the side track at the time, and I noticed this peculiar animal, and I just took a quick photograph of it out of my car, and within a flash it had gone over the hill and disappeared into the scrub.
You think that the scientific guys involved in it?
Most definitely it was that made it alert, and also looked at me.
What did it look like? Please, as fast as you can.
It appeared to be of a Labrador size. It had a large head, very thick set front, stripes on it, which I didn't notice much at the time because of the shadows on it, and a snout, rather like a pig. And its tail hindquarters looked a little bit like, very light anyway, very light structure.
Rilla Martin had presented a curious world with an enigma. Her photograph was surprisingly surprisingly more baffling than the less concrete descriptions of the past 80 years. The old explanations were now impossible. It was not a feral cat, not a mangy fox, not a pig with unusual markings. It was a tantalizing but infuriating photograph, demanding closer inspection but dissolving into the grainy imperfection of a holiday snapshot.
What a great description. Willa Martin actually passed that photograph on to the Wimmera Mail Times, and we were actually dealing with that newspaper recently, and they got quite excited when we were talking to them about the book, and I said, you guys, you had one of Australia's greatest crypto mysteries. You featured this photograph, etc., etc., and the reporter said, "Wow, that's fantastic. So where's this photograph now?" And I said, "I don't know, you guys lost it." 46 years ago, someone shoved it in a filing cabinet or something. It's never been seen again since. So that image that you saw before, that image had actually been scanned from a newspaper article. So the actual original was lost in a newspaper office, which is a bit of a travesty. But another sort of potential origin story for these large black cats that are seen in Australia is the theory that perhaps they are domestic cats that are somehow supersizing their way up the food chain. And this is actually a black cat that was shot down in Victoria by a farmer, unfortunately, or actually by a hunter. Unfortunately, there's no sense of scale, so you can't really get an idea of exactly how big it is. But you can see that it's a reasonably healthy-sized cat. And what I find interesting is no matter how big these cats get, they've still got titchy little feet and little pointy ears and little sort of ratty tails. So they don't really account for all of these stories that you hear coming out of regional and fringe areas around the cities of these large black cats with these incredibly beautiful, big, thick tails that curve up, those lovely, really thick, bushy, I don't mean like bushy as in lots of hair, but like as in a thick sort of tail. So you can really see the difference between the feral cats and the exotics with things like, the shape of the ears, the tail. And a lot of people relate to us when they're talking about their sighting that they will actually remark on the ears without realising the significance of the rounded ears, which tend to be the exotic cats, and the pointed ears, which tend to denote the domestic cats. Perhaps one of the most famous feral cats, large feral cats shot in Australia, was the Kurt Engel cat that was shot in 2005. Kurt was is a fairly no-nonsense Austrian engineer who happens to like hunting. He spends a lot of time in the Gippsland area, and one day when he was out hunting deer, he encountered a large black cat. He shot the cat. The angle of the bullet meant that when it exited the body, it actually exploded the head of the animal. So you'll see in a moment the photograph is of a large black cat body, and it kind of ends in a bit of a shredded, bloody mess, and that's where the head used to be. Kurt only kept the tail, and this is quite contentious, obviously, because there was no body for anyone to examine, and the incredibly long, soft, silky tail that he offered up for examination, he was accused of hoaxing it. But we were able to track down the biologist at the Melbourne Museum who first looked at the tail, and he was able to verify that it was in fact a large cat tail, of which kind of cat he did not know, but he could verify that it hadn't been artificially lengthened. A lot of people have said to us, "Oh yes, it's very easy to fake something like that. You just keep skinning up the body so that the actual tail ends up looking much longer. It's actually got a strip of back skin." but this wasn't the case. And of course Kurt stands by his story. It's Kurt there. There is a slight depth of field issue here that we readily acknowledge. I mean, it does perhaps look a little bit bigger than what it was because of where he's standing, and the cat is actually hanging a bit closer in the foreground. A lot of people who are sceptical of this story use this as you know, proof that the whole thing was a hoax. Kurt never wanted to go public with this story. We found Kurt when we were chasing up a rumour about a guy who had a cat in his freezer. We never found that guy, but we found this guy instead. And he was not interested in publicity. Someone had tried to buy the photographs of him. He wasn't interested in selling. He didn't really want any kind of publicity, and to us, I guess that underscored just you know, how much credibility and integrity he had. Unfortunately for him, soon after this story became front page news in Australia, he received a lot of phone calls from angry women and other people accusing him of, you know, killing a beautiful creature and oh, sorry, crapping on, sorry. Moving on along. This is Rory O'Brien, part of Rory O'Brien's quote that we featured in the book, but he was fairly adamant, as I mentioned earlier, that it hadn't been faked, that it was actually the real deal, and he said it looked completely authentic to him, real tale, hadn't been tampered with at all. And that's just another angle of the cat, and as you can see, it's kind of a bit of a mess at the head end. This is some footage of some injured cows down in the Gippsland area, and as you can see, something with very sharp claws has raked the haunches of this particular cow. This footage was actually taken by a government employee of the Department of Sustainability down in Victoria, and it was flushed out by an FOI. And it's actually circulated amongst, you know, those of us who are interested in these sorts of things over the past couple of years, and it's only recently been shown on television. And it's quite interesting. I mean, there's a real treasure trove. I'm sure many of you know about the Freedom of Information Act. There's an absolute treasure trove of material in a lot of these government departments. Okay. The next bit of footage is really gross. It's possibly the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. I thought twice about putting the stills in the book. Anyway, you've been warned. It's pretty awful. These sheep were found standing in a paddock with most of their muzzles and faces chewed off by a predator unknown. This particular incident sparked, we actually kicked the book off with it. It sparked a very in-depth investigation. The property where this occurred, the property owner had been losing 300 to 400 sheep a year, which is a hell of a lot. It's very expensive as well. And she was finding these animals in this awful state, and large cats had actually been sighted on the property. But in the course of the investigation of this incident, it was actually suggested that possibly thylacines might have been responsible because of the large gape required to get around the heads of these animals. You can see it, the injuries were horrific. All of these animals were put down after this footage was taken. You know, they weren't left to suffer or anything like that. But it's just incredible the kind of devastation that was wrought on these animals. And it was actually suggested that perhaps it was juvenile big cats of some description that might have been responsible. So moving right along. documentary called Alien Big Cats that was filmed several years ago. And Jan McDonald's actually a member, or was a member of AFRA, and she had been on stakeout in the Gembrook State Forest, and happy to catch that audio. And you know, that's the third piece of audio you've heard now this evening. The first was Genuine Cougar, and the other two sounded very, very similar. This was just a great customised road sign outside of Maryborough, Victoria, in central Victoria, where there have been probably a couple of thousand big cat sightings, and someone's popped a little puma in there as well. Anyway, it's all in the book. Cheap plug. And we're going to be putting that on Amazon soon. But thanks, guys. We're not fantastic public speakers, but we wanted to share that footage with you, so you can just get a taste of what's in the book. Thank you.